So when we were planning for this fall forum, we realized that we've been just getting a lot of calls and having many conversations with people in the field about strategic planning. And it just seemed as if so many organizations were contemplating plans or in the middle of plans, and we're just kind of wondering what are the different ways to go about planning today. And all kinds of questions about it. So we thought this might be a good year to actually delve into strategic planning and strategy. And of course, the response that we got when we announced the Fall Forum was unprecedented. As we mentioned last night, it sold out faster than any Fall Forum in history. So clearly, this is a hot topic. And we also know that you all enjoy coming here just to see each other as well. So, we're going to dive in right now, and I'm very excited about our next speaker. We are going to be hearing right now from the business strategist and author Kaihan Krippendorff. As an author, he's published 4 books, most recently Outthink the Competition, and he writes a popular blog for Fast Company. He's brought his unique business strategy approach, the Outthinker process, to corporations such as Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, Citibank, L'Oreal, United Technologies, Kraft, and Experian. He designs innovative business strategies that disrupt markets and unlock new growth. Please join me in welcoming Kaihan Krippendorff to the stage.
Excellent. It's great to be here. I'll just give you a little bit of background on what I want to share with you. I live not too far away from here in Greenwich, Connecticut. I used to work for a consulting firm, McKinsey & Company. And when I published my first book, I left the firm and I started this other firm. And really to sell the book, I would call my friends who worked in companies that I wanted to say that we worked for. DHL and Delta Airlines, and I'd say, I'll come and I'll do a lunch and learn for you for free, and I just want to be able to say that I've worked with you. And so that's how we started this consulting firm. And we would go to companies and we'd say, we're going to help you build big, bold, innovative, creative strategies. But what we found is that while people feel comfortable being creative in certain areas, somehow in strategy, the conversation begins becoming creative, and you can get a group of people to start thinking of some very different ideas, but towards the end of the conversation, maybe because strategy feels kind of serious, someone says, well, that won't work because of A, B, and C. And you kill off the really innovative, disruptive, fun things. And you never know when it's going to hit you, but the moment that hit me and the realization of what we were doing wrong was I was washing dishes. And my son, Lucas, here's a picture of him. He was playing with Legos. I have 3 children. He's my oldest. He's 6 years old here. He's 9 years old now. And he's playing with Legos. And I look over at him, and he says, until the age of 5, we spoke Spanish at home, so he calls me Papi. And he'd say, Papi, what's this? Can anyone guess what this is? What does that look like to you? Statue, some kind of, what was that? Usually I get Eiffel Tower, I get the Empire State Building, some kind of structure. But he explained, no, this is a rocket ship. It can go underwater, and it can pick up dinosaurs. And now you see that, right? And it was like at that moment, something shifted for me, and I saw Lucas in an entirely different way. And it occurred to me that what he had just done actually was not unlike what these great innovative strategists that we aspire to, what they do. Right? They sit down with the pieces they have, and they have the same things that you and I have, but then they stack them up in a unique way. And they share it with the world. They know that it looks weird, and they know it looks different, and they're actually proud of the fact that this thing looks different, because they know that that is what has the potential to actually change things. And so what that meant is that while we can hold on to our creativity in certain areas, it doesn't mean that we can't also hold on to that creativity in the area of strategy and building organizations. That this is natural, that if you have played with Legos, that if you've been 5 years old, you know how to do this. Now maybe, like me, you've forgotten how to do it in this area, but we can relearn it. And so we started looking at these great business innovators, great social innovators whose innovations have transformed the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry, they're just doing a test. We're working on it.
Okay.
May I have your attention, please. This is the fire command station. We are currently conducting a test of the fire alarm system. May I have your attention, please. This is the fire command station. We are currently conducting a test of the fire alarm system. Please disregard any horns or strobe, flashing lights or sound.
Perfect timing. Awesome. So before the alarm sounds, let me see how far I can get. So we looked at how do these innovators talk about how they create strategy. How do they see strategic options? And we got to interview some of these people, and there's more content for these kind of modern kind of strategists. And we think it really comes down to one thing. They all describe it differently, but they all talk about outthinking your competition. That we're taught in strategy that you need to start with something that others don't have, that the innovation comes from owning something, controlling something, but actually they don't describe it that way. They say that the competitive advantage comes from a different thought. This is Ray Kroc, founder of modern-day McDonald's, and he said, "My attitude was that competition can try to copy my style, but they can't read my mind. So I'll leave them a mile and a half behind." So you outthinking your competition. And there's a specific way that they talk about outthinking the competition. And they all describe it in different ways, but my favorite phrasing is Gandhi, who said, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win." And what he's laying out is a very intentional sequence. You must do something that those who would resist you, that those who would copy you, will instead ignore and laugh at you, so that while they're ignoring and laughing at you, you're growing this thing, and by the time they wake up and say, "Wait a second, that actually works, let's fight it, let's resist it," it's too late, you've already won. Today we call this disruptive innovation. Today we call this the blue ocean. 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu called it taking hold. It's been one strategic concept that we've known for millennia. We've just called it different things. What I invite you today to call this thing is the fourth option. And it's just a metaphor. It says the point beyond which others stop looking for options. When they get to three, we know great orators repeat in three. We know we have a trinity. At McKinsey, they taught me to break things down into threes and three sets of threes and three sets of threes. And what they do is they recognize where others have stopped thinking. And they look beyond that and they see a fourth option. I'll give you a quick example of a fourth option. In ancient times in China, the way that wealthy people entertained themselves is they would race horses. So I'd have my horses, you'd have your horses, and we'd have a race. And there was one general who kept losing to the prince. And he was going frustrated. So he asked a strategic advisor for help. And the strategic advisor said, "Well, I normally work on military problems, but I have time on my hands, so I'll work on your horse problem." And he observed the game. And he said, "It's a very simple game. Basically, you have three stocks of horses. You race your best, medium, slowest horses, as a result of which there are three ways to win. Today, we would call these three key success factors. You can either have better horses, but the thing is that the prince has more money, so he can afford better horses. You can either have better riders, but then the prince can pay higher salaries, so he gets better riders, so he wins there. Or you can have better care and training, but then again, the wealth of the prince gives him an advantage there. He can hire better trainers and pay for better food. And as a result of which, the general can never win." So the advisor says, "I see the fourth option. I see how you can win. I want you to challenge the prince to the last and final competition. This will be the competition that ends all competitions. I want you to invite the whole town. I want you to invite your family, your kids, your parents, 2 weeks from now." And so the general takes his advice, he challenges the prince, and on that specified day, the whole town appears. The stadium are filled with everyone, and the drums roll. Everyone's talking, excited about the race about to start. The drums start rolling, indicating that the race is about to start, and everyone goes quiet. And the prince puts up his first stock of horses, his best horses. And the general puts up his best stock of horses, and the advisor says, wait, if we play the game the way we've always played the game, we know what the outcome is. I want you instead to put up your slowest horses. And that is what it's like to play with the fourth option. When people expect you to do something, you do something different, and it changes the outcome of the game. Like Dick Fosbury in 1968 goes over the high bar backward. Before 1968, we went over the high bar always forward, using either a straddle, a scissor, or a roll. And so this is a sophomore in college. He's going to the Olympics. He's competing against the world's greatest athletes, all of his idols, and they've all gone over forward. Every trainer of every Olympic athlete until that point had trained them to go over forward. There was massive agreement that the way you went over was forward. And what did he do? He's turned his back on that. He went over backward. He wins the Olympics. It takes the competitors 8 years, 2 cycles to catch up. 8 years later, 90% of high jumpers are using what's now called the Fosbury flop. So to introduce these fourth options, you have this dilemma, which is that the fourth option will work because it is inconsistent with something that your competitors believe to be true. And you exist in the same belief structure as your competitors. So it will seem impossible for you too. And that's the fundamental dilemma of doing something different in the area of strategy. But these beliefs aren't necessarily true. That's one thing we have to keep in mind. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible is what Lord Kelvin of the Royal Society said. And that belief was consistent with everything that we knew about science and everything that we had observed. Harry Warner once said, "Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?" Ken Olsen, the CEO of Digital Equipment Corporation, said, "There is no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home." A Nobel Peace Prize winner in physics said, "There is no likelihood man can ever tap the power of the atom." And even our greatest innovator, Thomas Edison, said, "The phonograph is not of any commercial value." So what kills off your strategy being creative are these beliefs. And we just need to manage the beliefs, recognizing that they're not true. They're simply rules that help us understand and explain what we see around us. So we looked at how do you create these fourth options. We looked at teams that we'd worked with that had come up with very innovative strategies and those who had come up with very predictable strategies, because I would say most strategies, maybe not in your case, but most strategies sound something like, let's do what we did last year, but let's do it better, faster, cheaper. And that is because the methodologies that we traditionally use for strategic planning aren't designed to create creative strategies. They're designed to create predictable strategies. They either look like option narrowing or rules. Option narrowing is after you've laid out your options, you perform a bunch of data analysis against them to identify the optimal option. Rules are laying out a set of rules or best practices, checking your gaps and looking to close your gaps. Most strategy processes follow one of these too. But when groups got together and came up with really disruptive strategies, what we found is that they didn't follow these. Instead, they had 5 distinct conversations. And I think that any strategic methodology or approach that you adopt, you'll see you can fit into these 5. I'm not saying this is the truth, but this is a helpful way to look at strategy as a conversation that leads to a conclusion of where we want to go and how we're going to win. First, there's some kind of imagined conversation. You talk about the future, you talk about the trends, and you define a goal, but that goal is impossible. If you define the goal as an impossible goal, it forces your team to think differently. Then they have some kind of dissect conversation. They break down the problem. They look at what the root causes are. You know, there's audience. There's what we perform. There's our space. They break it down, but they don't use this in order to find out what the cause of the problem is. They use it to look where others don't look. When everyone else is looking at what's on stage, they're looking at what's the environment look like. When everyone else is looking at what the environment looks like, they're looking at what is the culture of our theater. They look where others don't look. Then they have an expand conversation. They generate lots and lots of potential strategies. This is the brainstorming, the ideation, the hypothesis creation. And then they have a dissect conversation in which they choose which of these ideas we're going to move forward with. And the trick is they choose the disruptive strategies. They choose the strategies that are those that your competition will not copy. They usually look like the bad strategies. They're good for you but bad for others. And then they have the sell conversation. How do we build buy-in from our board, from our funders, from our team around this strategy? So imagine, dissect, expand, analyze, sell, spells ideas. So we kind of put it into this package, hoping that the next time that you're building your strategy, you'll make sure that you're having each of these conversations. Do we have good ideas? And so what I wanted to do in the time that we have is to talk about expand. Sorry, I don't know why this is twice. I'll get you a digital copy of this, by the way. All right, so expand. So imagine that you've defined your vision or goal. You looked at your mission, purpose, core values, all that. You've dissected. You've seen what areas do we want to focus on for this year. Now you're generating hypotheses about how we're going to do something exciting in that space. How do great strategists see new options? How do they see the options that others don't see? And we can learn a lot about this by studying great chess players. This is Alexandra Kostanuk. She's a reigning women's world chess champion. And what she'll do as a marketing stunt, she'll challenge a whole town to play chess. And she'll line them up, and she'll go from board to board to board, each time seeing the winning move. When she's done with her rounds, she'll repeat. And you could be this guy with the curly hair looking at your board for 20 minutes, asking yourself, what's Alexandra going to do? And you won't see it. And like that, she can see it. We want to understand how she does that, because if she knew our game as well as she knows chess, she would certainly see something that others don't see. So how does she do it? Well, the research says that it really has to do with the size of her playbook. That she looks at the board and she recognizes more games than others. Experts, masters recognize twice as many games as experts. Grandmasters recognize 10 times as many games. So it's really a function of how many games do you recognize? How many patterns? I call these strategic narratives. These strategic narratives will sound like the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is a narrative that we're all familiar with. And you can imagine that if you were to strategize and introduce into your conversation a new narrative called the Trojan horse, if you evoke that, that would guide people's ideas towards some ideas they might not have had if you hadn't evoked that narrative. And we learn these narratives from a young age, and in different cultures we're exposed to different narratives. These are kind of embedded sub-narratives that guide what we see as possible, what occurs to us. My methodology is based off of a set of narratives from China called the 36 stratagems. And these stratagems, they sound very strange. They sound like deck the dead tree with bogus blossoms and lure the tiger down from the mountain. But I've been working with these for about 15 years, and what I do is I study company strategies, and I use these 36 narratives to categorize how they describe their strategy. And I believe that every strategic concept fits into one of these narratives. And so what I did recently was I looked at what are the narratives that are emerging among organizations that are winning today, and how do they compare to the narratives that companies that are just like them, similar industries, similar size, what narratives do they tell? And what's the difference? And what I found was there is a new playbook emerging. There is the fundamental playbook, which is you win by locking up resources, right? This would be your content, maybe. Achieving customer captivity, which is around increasing loyalty, getting, structuring your sales so that people return, people are motivated to bring others, and building economies of scale. These are the three narratives that lead to competitive advantage. These are the Warren Buffett narratives. These are important. You should be looking for them today and every day. But these are the same narratives that losing organizations look for. The difference is that winning organizations look at these, but then also look at these narratives. They look for moving early to next battleground, coordinating the uncoordinated, forcing a two-front battle, being good, and creating something out of nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to each of these narratives. When I have more time, we'll kind of I'll describe one and you'll have 5 minutes to write ideas down. We don't have time for that. So as I'm talking, I would suggest that you start writing ideas down as they pop up for you. So hopefully you'll walk out of here with a list of hypotheses that you can bring to your board, to your management team to explore as possibly part of your strategy. Okay? So the first narrative I'd like you to think about for your organization is move early to the next battleground. This is a simple narrative. You know how it goes, right? I'm here, my competitor is here, or my industry is here. I see where the next battleground is. I go there early, and that gives me an advantage. This is Wayne Gretzky saying, skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. I got a chance to meet this guy. My mom's from Bangladesh, and I visited her last year, and I met this guy, Kamal Kadir. He's an engineer trained at MIT, becomes an entrepreneur. He goes back to Bangladesh, and he sees a man selling fish. The man has a phone in one hand and cash in another. And he thinks this doesn't make sense. If he has a phone, he shouldn't have cash. He should be using a mobile P2P payment system to transact. How many people have used a mobile P2P payment system? You've given cash. Oh, that's a pretty big number. Usually in the United States, sort of like 10% of hands go up. If I asked this question in Nigeria, how many hands would have gone up? All of us. And Kenya as well. He said, we need a mobile P2P payment system similar to what they have in Kenya and Nigeria, but those systems are designed incorrectly. The system is improper and it will evolve. That's the next battleground. They're designed so that the phone company becomes a bank and it's not regulated like a bank, and that creates a lot of social issues. In the future, the system will evolve and there will be a system in which there is a bank in the middle. So he creates this. Just an interesting kind of marketing point. He wanted to use the word cash in the name of his product, but regulators prevented him from doing that. So instead he went with a Bangla word, which means prosperity, bcash. It's brilliant marketing, right? 3 years in, 13 million fishermen, farmers, small business owners transacting on his platform. It will this year be the largest mobile P2P payments platform in the developing world. So what we see is healthy, vibrant, successful organizations talk about this narrative more often. They say, where is the next battleground? How will technology shape the future? Social shifts, new geographies and spaces. And these are just the beginning of some thought starters. So that's one thing you want to look at is, where is the next battleground? How will the system evolve? And what can we do now to move early to the next battleground? The next narrative that they use more often is coordinate the uncoordinated. Think of it that the power comes from coordination. This is why birds fly in flocks. This is why fish swim in schools, why animals travel in herds. They all create power and safety by coordinating themselves. You go through a drive-through McDonald's today in the United States, you order a Big Mac, large fries, Diet Coke. There's a good chance that the person taking your order is a stay-at-home mom working on her home computer. She types in the order, sends it to the store, you turn the corner, your food is waiting for you. McDonald's has found that by coordinating this uncoordinated workforce, mothers that want a part-time job, they want to work from home, they want to check in and check out just to make extra money, by doing this, they can reduce costs, improve order accuracy, and reduce shrinkage. So the new paradigm is about coordinating things rather than controlling them. With my firm, Outthinker, we got a chance to work with Macmillan, and they were looking at the threat of self-published authors who would get turned down for a book deal, and then they would publish them on their own. They'd be successful, and then Macmillan would go to them and say, we'd like to publish your next book, and the author would obviously say, well, why? I don't need you anymore, right? And this was happening with increasing frequency, and they were worried that they were going to become irrelevant. So they said, how can we coordinate would-be self-published authors? And that question led to this idea of swoon reads. The way swoon reads works is, if you are a romance author, you submit a manuscript. And then the community starts interacting with you. They'll say, I like this aspect of your manuscript and not this one, and you could respond and change it. And then the community starts voting on you based off of your heat, tears, laughs, and thrills of your manuscript. And the top 20 become the top 10, become the top 3. It's like you Dancing with the Stars kind of competition, and the winner gets what? A publishing contract. So they've turned what could have been a disruptive threat into an advantage by coordinating it. So what you want to look at as you are having the conversation of your strategy is, what is uncoordinated in our space, around us, in the system in which we operate, and that we would like to coordinate? And these are just some thought starters. That's the second narrative, coordinating what's uncoordinated. The third strategic narrative, I call it force a two-front battle. And what we're seeing today is that companies are willing to stretch outside of their industry without really changing their business. And we think that is true because winning organizations today less often define themselves by their industry. They define themselves by something else that gives them the flexibility to stretch into new industries. Amazon, for example, doesn't consider itself to be an online retailer. When it was looking for opportunities to expand, it said, we're already so dominant in so many categories, and we're going to add new categories, but there's not a whole lot more room to grow. They're now more valuable than Walmart. We said, what are we good at? We're good at managing servers, collecting payments, tracking packages. Why don't we just package all that up, and let's offer that as a service to retailers? And they launched Amazon Web Services. They attacked software cloud providers like Microsoft. And I can tell you, because we've done work with Microsoft, when they wrote their business plans for their cloud services 7 years ago, they didn't consider Amazon to be a real credible threat. Now, this is a $7 billion business for them in just 5 years. This would not have been even considered if they defined themselves as an online retailer. Zappos CEO of Zappos said, we were growing pretty well when we thought ourselves as a shoe company, but when our growth really took off is when we realized we're not a shoe company, we're a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. This creates this disruptive effect because other shoe companies don't know how to compete with a customer service company. You behave differently as a customer service company. An accounting firm, they were growing just kind of average when they thought of themselves as a CPA firm, but we had them look at, well, what are you really good at? Well, we're really great at recruiting accountants. So they changed their focus, changed their investment, developed a training program, changed their business model, and now from flat growth, they're growing to 30% a year. It can be subtle. But the key, the opening, the entry point to this opportunity is to ask, what is your unique advantage or capability as not defined by your industry? So that's the third thing for you to think about. The next narrative that we see winning companies citing more often than losing companies is what we call be good. Is that the old paradigm of business was that corporations had to choose. You have to choose between being good or being profitable. That traditional for-profit corporations existed to serve one master, to maximize shareholder value. And you might serve one master. Maybe it is the community. But this leads to resistance because it can never lead to an optimal strategy. It will create resistance to your growth and over the long run, limit your ability to serve that one community. A better strategy is one that benefits all stakeholders, that is good for the community, but also good for employees, also good for shareholders, also good for the environment, also good for the country, also good for your customers, your audience. If you can find a strategy in which all of these people benefit, that's the ultimate strategy because everyone wants you to win. It's like playing football and there's no one else on the other side of the field and all the fans are on your side of the stadium. Right? It's just smart. It's not only good to be good, it is smart to be good. We're starting to see the emergence of new business models like Best Doctors. What they do is they help people get second opinions. Like a woman who's going blind. And her doctor brings her to a specialist. Turns out she has brain cancer. She makes an appointment to have an operation. But her employer is a Best Doctors customer, which means that their employer pays Best Doctors $1 per employee per year to offer this service to their employees. So she can call Best Doctors, and 2 weeks later, they find a doctor who says, before you operate on her, give her these pills and see what happens. Sounds like she has this strange condition that sometimes can affect brain tissue, usually affects muscle tissue. She takes the pills, and now she can see. She was about to have a hole cut in her skull and healthy brain tissue removed, and they saved her from that. But their CEO has no shame in admitting that he makes 40% gross margins doing that. that they're growing at 30% a year, that they're in all these countries, and they want to be in every country in the world because the more they grow, the more good they're doing. So I'm proposing to you to remove the idea that you have to choose between being profitable and doing good. You don't have to. My wife works for MasterCard. She's been there for 15 years. In the last 5 years, she's been more engaged at work than ever before, to a great extent because of this guy, Ajay Banga, the CEO, who said fundamentally what we do is a force for good in the world. We remove cash from the system. And drug dealers don't use credit cards to transact. Wherever there is cash, it invites unhealthy economic activity. So I'm not talking about making money and giving it away. That's easy. I'm talking about aligning our decisions behind doing good and being profitable. My cousin from Germany moved to New York to work for this company in Brooklyn, Holsti. Anyone heard of Holsti? Anyone seen this manifesto before? This is their manifesto. They wrote their mission on a piece of paper. They put it out and kind of transformed their business. This is what she was inspired by. This is their manifesto. I'll just read the first third of it. This is your life. Do what you love and do it often. If you don't like something, change it. If you don't like your job, quit. If you don't have enough time, stop watching TV. If you're looking for the love of your life, stop. They'll be waiting for you when you start doing things you love. This says nothing about what they sell, right? Or the efficacy of their products or the quality, no. But it is something that customers want to buy from, employees want to work for, investors want to invest in, suppliers want to supply to, distributors want to distribute to. It creates that soft power, that moral force that helps them win. So you really want to look at removing the idea that you have to choose. How can you create strategic power by pursuing a good strategy? I just want to make one point. Usually I'm doing this presentation to for-profit companies that are thinking about how do I stretch into doing good. But you may be coming at it from the other direction. It's still difficult to step into. How can you guys get excited about making money? Right? And investing that in your mission.
Workshop at 12 o'clock.
There you go. There you go. And the fifth strategy, strategic narrative that we see winning companies citing more often than losers, is this one that we call create something out of nothing. It plays on the fact that we play our game following a rule that doesn't exist. And we follow this rule blindly because it exists in most games we play. The rule is you have to play with the pieces that are there. You can't take a queen and put it back next to my king. But there are other types of games. The analog to chess in Japan and China is Go, and in Go the rules are the opposite. You can't move the pieces on the board in Go. You can only add them and remove them. So what if we played the game of building our organization to achieve our mission by just looking at adding and removing things rather than trying to influence what's already there? This is what Julie Pickens had to do. She was a mom, former entrepreneur, and she's looking for a saline baby wipe. They don't exist, so because she's an entrepreneur, she says, I'm going to make them. And she patents the process to create a saline baby wipe. She's about to launch it into the market as a saline baby wipe, and it occurs to her that if she plays in the existing category, eventually she's going to attract the attention of Colgate-Palmolive and Procter & Gamble, and they're going to crush her. So she says, why don't I instead, let me shift this, and I'm going to create a new category. And instead of applying this to babies' butts, we'll apply it to their noses, and we'll call it boogie wipes. Boogie wipes, gentle saline wipes for stuffy noses. It sits on a different shelf. Because of this, Procter & Gamble let her grow so strong that by the time they said, wait a second, this should be a baby wipe, let's compete with her, they realized she was too strong. They asked her to move to Cincinnati, license the Puffs brand, and create a separate company that creates Puffs branded saline products. She beat Procter & Gamble because she chose to expand a new category rather than compete in an existing category. Igvar did the same thing. He sold furniture. He'd rent a table at a conference. He'd sell furniture. The thing is, he was such a good furniture salesman that one day his competition all ganged up on him and said, let's not invite Ingvar to the next conference. So what did Ingvar do? Did he find a new thing to sell or a new conference? No. He said, I'm going to create my own conference. I'm going to rent a convention hall. I'm going to set up tables. I'm going to sell furniture there, and I won't let them rent a table from me. Then he made so much money on that conference that he did it again, and again, and again, and again, and it became IKEA. IKEA is just a furniture conference that happens every day, and Ingvar owns all the tables. So look at, could you put a queen next to their king? Is there something that is not there that you would like to create, rather than playing inside the existing categories, or inside the existing occasions, inside the existing needs, inside the existing customers? Could you create those instead? What would that look like? The new occasion that we create, that we own, what would that look like? So those are the 5 narratives. In your strategy process, when you get to the point of exploring your strategic options, all you need to do is pay attention to what narratives are being used and introduce some new narratives. Here are 5 very powerful narratives for you to introduce. And it's a very natural kind of thing. It will naturally lead people to see new strategic options. So I'm going to wrap up by just giving you some advice as you walk through these stages of your strategy process. When you're at the stage of your process where people are talking about the future, you're going to get to meet Mr. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I forgot it. There's one other thing that I wanted to punch in. When you are in the stage of your process, when you get to choosing your ideas, you've generated these ideas, you're going to confront this issue that the great ideas will look impossible. But there's an easy way out of this, which is just to force your team to sit with the impossible idea a little bit longer than others. Circle that crazy idea and ask yourself, why is this really impossible? And how could we remove what makes it look impossible? And so this is what I want to show you now. So as you go through this, you're going to meet people who are going to want to stop you in each phase. When you get to imagine, you're going to get to meet Mr. Practical. Mr. Practical is going to say, we don't have time to think about 5 years from now. We have to think about next year. And what you want to tell Mr. Practical is, we will think about next year and we'll think about 5 years from now. It's not a choice. We have to do both. When you get to dissect, you're going to get to meet Mr. Obvious. You give a child a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We all fall victim to this. We think that the answer lies in our domain. If we're marketers, we think it's a marketing problem. If we're operators, we think it's an operations problem. If we're programmers, we think it's a program problem, right? You want to just force yourself to look at all of the possible dimensions, not just the obvious one. When you get to expand, you're going to meet Mr. Expert, who's going to create a conversation that sounds like this. Here's an idea. We tried that before. Here's an idea. Yeah, well, I heard that theater over here tried that, didn't work. And what you want to tell them is, tell the Mr. Expert, thank you for your contribution. But it will be more helpful if you contribute to the next phase when we're actually analyzing the ideas, not when we're generating the ideas. When you do get to analyze, you're going to get to meet Mr. What Works. Mr. What Works is going to say, yeah, this was fun, that whole idea of creating a new membership pricing scheme. But we know what works. Better product. Let's try to lower our prices. Let's expand our marketing. That works. And what you want to tell Mr. What Works is, yes, we will do that, and we will also explore this 4th option. And when you get to sell, you're going to meet Mr. Cog, who's going to say, they'll never listen to us. And what you want to tell Mr. Cog is, when a group of people who know and are committed to our organization that we are, and we think strategically about what's possible, they have to listen to us. And if you do that, that's how you'll find your 4th options. And it will feel like this. You remember the general, right? What happens? He's about to put up his fastest horses, and the advisor says, no, put up your slowest horses. And he thinks, well, I'm going to get destroyed. But he trusts his advisor, so he follows him through. And at the first heat, he is completely destroyed. None of his horses beat any of the other horses. And everyone's laughing. His kids get up to leave. His wife is embarrassed. And he thinks he made a mistake. But in the second heat, what happens? He puts up his best horses. And the prince has already run his best horses, so he has to put up his medium horses. And the general's best horses are just good enough that they can beat the prince's medium horses. So now it's 1-to-1. And then in the third heat, he puts up his medium horses, and his medium horses are just good enough that they can beat the prince's slowest horses. And for the first time ever, 2-to-1, he wins. Right? That's how a fourth option plays out. And just as you go through it, just remember, this is natural. You do this in other areas of your life. You've done this in other time periods of your life. But strategy making can be a creative, fun, differentiating process. And in fact, that is what makes a great strategy. It is natural for all of us. So there's my info. I'll get you the digital copy of the presentation. But let me just leave it there. Thank you. Time this so that we have time for questions or comments. Normally I do this in 90 minutes. They asked me to do it in 45 minutes so that we would have enough time to talk, because I know that there are many layers and things. So we have a question up there or a comment there.
So the common way for, I guess, a theater organization or any organization to think about its strategy is you get together the staff and you get together the board of trustees twice a year and you sit down and you think about strategy. So I bet you've got other tactics in thinking about the strategy of an organization that are more creative than that. Can you give us some pointers?
I think, yeah, what we talked about here was a way to manage that twice a year conversation so that what comes out of that is more creative. But you're right, what I think works better is to meet more often, to make strategy an ongoing conversation, a dynamic conversation throughout the organization, to do this every month. And the key to doing that is to not think of strategy, and I'm pushing a little bit further than maybe you feel comfortable with, but not think of strategy as laying out all our issues, solving them, and then executing. But instead, you have a constant backlog of issues. And every month you pick up the top one, think about it strategically, and run that, then the next one, and the next one, and you keep updating this backlog. It is an agile approach to strategy, and that's a way to make it, so you're able to react more quickly to opportunities and to and to new threats, right? Yeah. Great. Yes.
You say that the fourth option, the disruptive strategy, frequently looks like a bad idea.
Yes.
How do you know you're not pursuing a stinker?
Yes. I think the key is to just, if you force your team to sit with the idea a little bit longer than the competition or whoever else would introduce that idea. And I'm coming really from the mindset of you want to do something that is unique for your theater in your market, and one that other theaters won't duplicate quickly. That's my mindset, okay? So what you do is you hold that idea and you say, this looks impossible. Why does it look impossible? What are the 3 reasons that this looks impossible? Technically, it's not feasible. The audience won't accept it. Our performers won't support it, right? And then for each of those, you brainstorm, how can we remove each barrier? Right? Come up with 3 ways to remove the technical barrier, 3 ways to remove the audience barrier, 3 ways to remove the performance barrier. And what you'll find is that the idea actually now looks surprisingly less impossible, still may be difficult. And then if you can't get it all the way to the point of, yes, this is a good idea, what you do is you run a small test. In corporations, they use this is a phrase that I'm really liking, which is the 5-5-5 test. 5 people, $5,000, 5 days. You have to adjust that a little bit for you. Maybe it's like 2 people, $5,000, 3 weeks, something like that, 2-5-3 or something. And you run a test, and that it reduces the cost of failure if it doesn't work, Yeah. There's one over there. Thanks.
Hi, Michael Robertson from The Lark. I was really struck by a few things. At first, I was really kind of annoyed that we were sitting here talking about winning and competition, and we live in an under-resourced field, to say the least. And we kind of live in a paradigm of scarcity, right? Theater people can make something out of nothing. We are brilliantly creative, but we are highly, if you stick around for the weekend, you'll know how under-resourced we are as we talk about our theater facts. But I was struck by narrative 23, which is coordinate the uncoordinated, and 33, be good.
Yes.
So by the nature of who's in this room, we're being good.
Yes.
And we're all kind of in a fishbowl. When we Google map out, most people aren't going to the theater. We're kind of irrelevant to society, like all of these things. And so I'm worried about the competition within the field and the lack of coordination in the field. And I'm curious if you have thoughts for us, if we Google map out and we go, oh, we're all in this fishbowl, the theater fishbowl, how do we think about competition beyond the field? How do we coordinate ourselves as under-resourced organizations? But if you have any thoughts for that, sort of the collect, I love the idea of sort of the coordination of herding these cats in this room is wild, right? Because we're so busy, we're myopic, we're looking at our boards, we're in our offices, but the collective power in this room is really kind of amazing. The creativity here is phenomenal.
Yes.
And we should be bringing in billions of dollars and being many of these folks.
Yes.
So if you have any thoughts for us on sort of combining narrative 23 and 33,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear.
I've got a bunch of ideas, but one thing I think that might open up things up is, so my favorite band is U2, and there's one line in one of these songs which is, choose your enemy wisely for they will define you. And so what I would say is, first, you start with your mission, your long-term vision. And if that is a huge portion of the population of Americans experiencing theater, your competition is whoever is making actions that are preventing that from happening, right? So you have competition from other forms, other entertainments, and you define yourself against that. And I think if you define yourself against that, that will also open up what you're describing is the opportunities to coordinate amongst yourselves, right? So maybe your mission really is around what portion of people, I don't know, people in metropolitan cities experience the theater, and do you have a number? Yeah.
5% of people see a live performing arts performance.
Great, 5%. So so maybe your big, hairy, audacious goal, to coin this Jim Collins phrase, this BHAG, is that 5% in the next 5 years will be 15%. And then that will define who are the competitors that are standing in the way of that, And then you're right, on the coordination, it's becoming increasingly easy to coordinate things. This is why we see Uber, this is why we see OpenTable. All of those are the result of coordination costs coming down. The old way of coordinating things was through a hierarchy and an organization, and increasingly it's becoming more efficient to coordinate things through a network. This is a network. But there are also new technologies and ways, and also kind of shifts towards people being more open to coordinating, to staying in other people's houses with Airbnb, for example. And so those are opening up possibilities of coordination that maybe you're not fully seizing. Yeah. Yes. We're going to get you a microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Kristin, Cory, Gulf Shore Playhouse. This is the question I ask every year, so everyone's going to be sick of me by now. But I'm going to ask you, because you're a guy who comes from possibilities. The thing that plagues me, and Michael just said it, and I'm so grateful for you saying that, because we think of ourselves as starving artists, we think of ourselves as under-resourced, and yet so many of us are engaging in these multi-million-dollar capital campaigns, bringing large tens of millions of dollars, 20s of millions of dollars budgets every year into play. And the question that I constantly ask myself is, how do we switch out of that thinking of being under-resourced to being starving artists and into a world where the model is actually that theater has value and it's worth paying for, and it's no longer like 50-50, we have to rely on donations in order to make our business model work. How come the nation thinks that theater isn't worth paying for?
Yeah, I think that your strategic actions reveal what you're actually committed to as an organization. And so if you dig under that, there might be some commitment to theater as being some kind of association with what's good is the starving theater. And the thriving theater maybe is not mission-driven, something like that. And that might be the right choice, right? But I think if you went through a conversation of what are our values, both as we express them and as we want them to be, and then what is our long-term purpose, right? And you go through that journey, then you might surface whatever it is that has you repeating the choices that lead to where you are, you know? I was just in Dubai on Thursday, and we went through, with the client, they went through a whole kind of this journey on what their core purpose is, and it was really powerful. You know, it requires a good deal of dialogue. But again, I think that your strategy reflects what you're committed to, and if you're not getting what you want, then there's something broken there, and you're actually committed to something that you're not aware that you're committed to, you know? Yes.
Hi, I'm Patrick Kennedy. I'm board of directors from the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. Appreciated your talk here.
Yeah.
One of the things I was just thinking about is, as a nonprofit, we actually have a few stages on which we compete. So we compete for donors, for donations, right? We compete for our audiences, and we also have to compete for the talent in our organization and on the stage. And so how do we, you know, that's, I think, one of the things we're going to have to look at is, how do we create that purpose, that mission, those engagement models to address all three of those, right? Because they are different constituencies and perhaps different tactics we have to take, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. I think that in the dissect portion of your conversation, you break down what are the drivers. And if you don't do it explicitly, then there is some implied order that you are audience-oriented, you are funder-oriented, you are artist-oriented, right? But when you don't do it explicitly, it just seems obvious. But if you were to draw a map and say, these are the three audiences that fundamentally we're bringing together, let's come up with a strategy for each of those and force yourself to spend equal time on each of those. It will force you, remember we talked about Mr. Obvious looks, where it's obvious to look? That map will, you know, help you step out of that. And you might have a strategy for performers. And we might say, and then think about the accounting firm again, right? They thought of themselves as a CPA firm. They said, no, the real driver of our business is recruiting awesome talent. What would it look like if a theater company was, and your fundamental purpose was identifying and creating opportunities for amazing talent? That might lead to very different choices, you know. Yes. We'll get you a microphone.
Thanks. Ann Garner from Berkshire Playwrights Lab. And back to those misters, those people who sort of stand in your way. Can you talk a little bit about getting buy-in?
Yeah.
What happens when, how do you get around that if you're not the most powerful person in your organization?
Yeah. About the misters, I was going for a Reservoir Dog reference, and no one gets it. And then I was thinking, well, I should make some of them miss, but then I wasn't sure which ones, and so it was messy. So that's why they're all misters. So, you know, the buy-in, we kind of use this structure, which is identifying who are the key stakeholders that you need buy-in from. And the way to do that is to imagine that the strategy is working, and who do you need to have support from? Not necessarily the obvious kind of the board, the team, the talent, or whatever that is, right? But you fast forward to imagine who is bought into this as a result of which the idea was successful, right? And then crafting the message from, and I feel like I'm stepping into your territory more than mine, but you craft the message from their point of view, right? You think about what are their incentives, what are their concerns, what are their triggers, what's the language that resonates with them. When you're talking to a CFO, you're using things like return on investment. When you're talking to human resources, you're talking about something about people engagement, right? You're talking to a marketing person, you're talking about kind of audience engagement, something like that, right? And then take the message points and then, you know, communicate it in their way. And so these innovators, one thing that's distinct about innovators who are successful at getting buy-in for their ideas is they view the political challenge as part of the creative problem-solving process. Whereas others view it as, I built this mousetrap, people should see the beauty in the mousetrap and just support it. But you view that buy-in as part of the process. So to summarize, I would say views as exciting part of the problem-solving process, as opposed to something we shouldn't have to do. Think about who your key stakeholders are from the future, and then thinking from their point of view, crafting the message so it resonates with that stakeholder, Yeah. Great. Any other questions? There's one back there.
Last question. Thanks, Kaihan.
Yeah.
You talk about sitting longer with the problem or the idea than your competition.
Yeah.
What about successful companies? How long do they sit with something that's not going to work? When's that realization that it's a failed idea? Not really failed, but tried and time to move on.
Yes. So there's a great book called Getting to Plan B. And it basically says that successful companies, their first idea didn't work, and they're forced to rethink the idea. And there's like these two guys that are looking to create a charter yacht business, and they keep building these yachts to charter them, but then people keep wanting to buy them. And then they think, we're never going to get this charter business going if we keep selling the yachts. And they said, actually, we're in the business of selling yachts. And they become this very successful, yacht construction business. And the problem is, he also did some research. He said that and found that the more money that a business gets in the Series A and the first round of funding, the less likely they are to succeed. So it speaks to when you make a commitment to that idea, a financial commitment to the idea, then you're less likely to give up plan A and go to plan B when it's plan B that will work. So I think that you're asking about after the execution of the idea, after you've kind of greenlit the idea. And I think that one great way to do it is what we were talking about before, is that short experiment, that 5-5-5 experiment. So you're not saying, doing all the research, is it a good idea or not? Do I greenlight it or not? You don't greenlight the idea, you greenlight the experiment. You learn and try to get to plan B as quickly as possible. And that'll reduce the risk that I'm hearing in your question of the sunk cost forcing us to keep doing something that's not working. Awesome. Great, thank you. This was really a pleasure working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaihan, for launching us so beautifully and giving us so much to think about. We're going to take a coffee break now. So I just want to remind you that there's a table with information about the gala where you can text your message and your pledge. There's also a table with TCG books, so go check out what we're publishing and just have a good time talking to each other. We'll see you back here at 11.